Hello everyone. We're going to continue preparing for Pesach by learning Mishnayos from the tractate of Pesachim, which deals with the laws of Pesach. We are up to chapter number 2. There's going to be a link posted in the comments below where you can follow along as well. So chapter 2 begins, Zagde Mishnah, Kol Shosha Muter Le'echol, at any point in time where a human being is allowed to eat chametz. Now it's a very unusual phraseology here that the Mishnah uses. And the reason it uses this is because normally a person is allowed to eat chametz only till the 4th hour of the day, which would be 10 o'clock if you want to divide all the daylight hours into 12. This year the time is going to be 10:41, so a person's only allowed to eat chametz until 10:41. However, the Gemara tells us that a Kohen is allowed to eat truma into the 5th hour of the day. That means a Kohen would be able to eat truma from 10:41 to 11:47. So the Mishnah says at any point in time that a person is able to eat chametz, even though a regular person can't eat chametz into the 5th hour of the day, 10:41 a.m., But because a Kohen is allowed to eat truma during the 5th hour of the day, therefore, Meichele behema lachayes v'loifes u'moichri l'nachri u'murtabana. Therefore, a person is allowed to feed their animals. You could feed your birds, you could feed your chickens. You're able to sell it to a person who's not Jewish, and the chametz would be permitted to benefit from it. So during the 5th hour of the day, which is again between 10:41 and 11:47 this year, you're not allowed to eat chametz, but you could benefit from it. You can feed it to your animals as well as sell it. Avar zamanoi, however, once the 5th hour passed, and now we're into the 6th hour, and it's completely forbidden to eat chametz, author b'hanasa, a person is not permitted to have any benefit from the chametz. What does that mean? A person cannot even use it as fuel for your oven. So that means when it comes to burning the chametz, you're allowed to burn the chametz, but you're not allowed to get any benefit from the fire from that chametz. If that fire is providing you with light, if that fire is providing you with warmth, that is going to be prohibited to you to benefit from the fire that is burning your chametz. All right, the next Mishnah. So the Mishnah continues. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ein bir chametz elas reifa. Rabbi Yehuda says that the Torah commands us to remove chametz from our possession. How do you do it? Rabbi Yehuda says the way that you do it is by burning the chametz. Why does he say burning the chametz? Because we have already a precedent for something like this. The Torah tells us that if you have a leftover sacrificial meat, that sacrificial meat is prohibited to be benefited from, therefore you have to burn it. Rabbi Yehuda says, just like chametz, which is prohibited to be benefited from it, the way you burn it is like the sacrificial meat that's prohibited from benefiting from it, and you're going to burn it, that's how you get rid of it. However, the sages say, ein mefarer v'zoyre l'ruach, af mefarer v'zoyre l'ruach u'matal yam. However, the sages say that burning it is not required. Even though that is the custom today that we burn the chametz, that's not required. All you have to do is crumple it up, throw it into the wind or throw it into the ocean, and that will satisfy the requirement to burn the chametz. Mishnah Beis. Zog the Mishnah chametz shal nachri sha'avar olav Pesach mutabana. A Gentile who owned chametz during the holiday of Pesach, and then after Pesach he wants to sell it, not a problem. You're allowed to buy it. It does not matter that the chametz existed during Pesach, because it was owned by a Gentile. A Gentile can own chametz on Pesach. No prohibition applies to it, and you can purchase it and benefit from it after Pesach. B'shel Yisrael, however, if a Jew owned chametz on Pesach, asar behana, it is prohibited to derive any benefit from it. Shenemar lo'yer lecha sa'ar, as the Torah says, nor shall leaven be seen within you. So this actually is a big problem, because there are Jews today, for whatever reason, have not yet fulfilled the mitzvah of getting rid of the chametz, and they own chametz on Pesach. You're absolutely 100% prohibited from benefiting from eating, consuming, purchasing that chametz. The main area when it comes into play is a business that's owned by a Jew that sells chametz and is open during Pesach. So what we generally speaking do is any business that's owned by a Jew that sells chametz, for 30 days after the holiday of Pesach, we may not buy chametz from that business, because we assume that chametz was owned during Pesach and therefore becomes prohibited. If you have a question about a specific business, please contact me and I'll be happy to help you out. The next Mishnah. Zog Delika Mishnah Nachri Shehilva Yisrael Al Chamtzai. So a non-Jewish person lent money to a Jew, and the Jew gave the Gentile as collateral chametz. And the chametz was put into the possession of the Gentile before the holiday of Pesach. Then the Jew was not able to pay back the money. So the chametz, the non-Jewish person, retroactively owned the chametz that previously belonged to the Jew from before the time of Pesach. Achara Pesach muter bahana. The law is that chametz becomes allowed for a Jew to benefit from, because of the fact that the chametz became in the ownership of the Gentile retroactively, which means before the holiday of Pesach started, the Gentile gained possession of the chametz. Therefore, the chametz belonged to a Gentile during Pesach, and a Jew could benefit from it afterwards. However, a Jew who lent money to a person who's not Jewish, and the person who is not Jewish gave the Jew chametz as collateral, and this all took place before Pesach, and the Gentile was not able to pay. So therefore the chametz became owned by a Jew before the holiday of Pesach. After a Pesach asar bahana, that chametz is totally prohibited for a Jew to benefit from, because the Jew had possession of it during the holiday of Pesach. Chametz shenafla ala mafeilas. What if a building falls down, a wall falls down, and traps chametz underneath it? Harihu kimavar, the halacha is that we consider that chametz as if you got rid of it because there is no way you can get it, there's no way you can access it. The halacha does not require that you pick up the boulders, you pick up the rocks, you pick up the walls. You don't have to go that far. We consider the chametz to be destroyed. Rabbi Gamliel, however, Rabbi Gamliel adds to this. Rabbi Gamliel says, Kol she'ein hakelav yachol lechafesh acharav. He says, if a dog, through digging under the pile, will actually reach the chametz, then you are obligated to dig up the rubble and remove that chametz, because we would consider that chametz to be accessible. If a dog would not be able to dig through and remove the chametz, then you don't have to. Mishnah Dalet. Zog delika Mishnah ha'oichel trumas chametz b'Pesach. The Torah tells us that a person has to separate truma from the produce that they grow and they give it to a Kohen. That is somewhere between 1/40th and 1/60th of the produce that you own. So what if a person ate chametz on Pesach, but the chametz that you ate was truma? So the Mishnah says it depends. Bishoigig, if you ate that truma by mistake, you had no idea it was chametz, you had no idea that it was truma, you have to pay the normal penalty that you have for eating truma, which is mishalem keren. You have to pay the Kohen back for the food that you ate, which you're not allowed to. A person who's not a Kohen is not allowed to eat truma. The chaimish, plus you have to add a fifth. The Torah penalizes you that you have to add a fifth. Now the commentaries ask a question: why do you have to pay the Kohen back anything at all? On Pesach, any chametz, whether it's truma or not, is considered to have zero value because you're not allowed to benefit it from at all in any way. So why is it that you have to pay back the Kohen? So there are two answers. One answer is because when you eat the truma of a Kohen, you don't pay back the value of the truma. Rather, you have to pay back exactly the same amount. So just making it up, let's say you ate 5 apples, you have to give back 5 apples. You don't have to give back the value of 5 apples, so it's not relevant that chametz doesn't have any value on Pesach. It doesn't matter. You have to give back what you took, not the value of what you took. And the second part of it is, why do you have to give back the fifth as well? Because the fact that you have to give back what you took plus the fifth, that's part of the process of tshuva. That's part of the process of repairing for the sin, the transgression, even though it was accidental. So we do not deny the Jew the ability to atone for his accidental transgression. Therefore, he has to pay back the produce plus the fifth. B'mezid, however, what if a Jew ate the truma and the chametz on purpose. So if you ate it on purpose, pater mitashlumin umidime etim. Right? If you ate it on purpose, you are pater. You are not obligated to pay at all. Right? One of the reasons is because if you ate it on purpose, right, there is no penalty of repayment. Number one, the penalty is kares, but of spiritual excision. Number two, because you ate it on purpose, and the truma is worth, and during Pesach, the value of chametz is nothing. There is nothing to return at all in any way. The Mishnah continues. With Mishnah number 5. Zog delek Mishnah, Eile dvarim she'adam yoytze behen yedei chavase b'Pesach. Right? These are the things that a person can fulfill the obligation of eating matzah on Pesach. Bechitim, with eating wheat. Now, before I continue, it's important to note that the only type of wheat that you can use on Pesach is kosher lePesach wheat. If a person thinks that they're going to go to the supermarket and purchase wheat and use that wheat to mix with water and make sure that it's baked less than 18 minutes, you're going to have a big problem because the wheat that is sold in a typical supermarket is already chametz. There are ingredients that are added to it. The way that the wheat is treated actually makes it chametz. So you cannot buy wheat in a supermarket. It actually has to be kosher lePesach. All right, so back to the Mishnah. So you're allowed to eat matzah on Pesach that's made out of wheat. Bisa'oirin, that's made out of barley. B'chusmin, that's made out of spelt. Ubishifon, which is made out of rye. Ubishiboilis sha'ol, or with matzah that's made out of oats. Now the custom is that we only fulfill the mitzvah of matzah using matzah that's made out of wheat, because that is considered to be the most tasty. However, of course, if a person has issues with digesting wheat, then a person's able to use spelt matzah, or a person's able to use oat matzah. But if you don't have a problem digesting, it's a wheat matzah that you should use, not spelt or barley. Now the Gemara, the Mishnah is now going to list a bunch of cases where normally you might think you would not be able to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah using matzah produced from this grain, yet we're going to say that in fact you are allowed to. Number one, v'yotzin b'damai, the Torah tells us that you have to tithe your produce. If you do not tithe the produce, it is absolutely not kosher. You're not allowed to eat it. You can't fulfill the mitzvah of matzah with it. But what if there's a doubt as to whether the produce was tithed? So generally speaking, a person would not be allowed to eat produce that there's a doubt if it was tithed. However, to fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah, if there's a doubt if the produce was tithed, you can still fulfill the mitzvah eating that produce. The Torah tells us that you have to take a tithe of your produce and you have to give it to a Levi. Then the Levi himself has to give a tithe to, the Levi has to separate Truma and give it to a Kohen. And you are allowed to eat matzah that was given to a Levi as Meiser, as a tithe, and then the Levi gave the portion of Truma to a Kohen. Now, why is the Mishnah bringing up this case? Because there could be a scenario where the owner of the produce gave the Levi his tithe before the owner of the produce itself separated the Truma that he has to give to the Kohen, because he separated the tithe before he was obligated in giving it to before being obligated to give Truma to the Kohen. This may sound a little bit complicated, but again, the Mishnah says that a Levi is allowed to eat matzah made from produce that he separated his portion of the Truma to the Kohen, even though the original owner did not separate the Truma for the Kohen, but that's because he was not yet obligated to separate it to the Kohen. Uve meiser sheni, the hegdish sheniftu. Now, a Jew is obligated to separate at various years another tithe, and with that tithe, he brings the produce to the Jerusalem, and he consumes it in Jerusalem. However, the Torah says you are allowed to redeem that produce if it's too large and too bulky to bring to the temple. You could redeem it for money. However, if you're redeeming it for money, you have to add a fifth to it. So the Mishnah says that if you redeemed your produce for money, but you did not add a fifth to it, even though you're not supposed to do that, nevertheless, you will fulfill the obligation for eating matzah on Pesach with that redemption. The Mishnah continues, v'hakoyanim and kohanim, b'chala u'b'truma. They are able to fill the mitzvah of eating matzah with the challah, which is a portion of dough that a Jew is obligated to separate almost every time that you make dough, depending on the size of the dough, to a kohen. That gift that you give to the kohen, the kohen can make matzah out of that. U'b'truma, and the kohen can eat matzah that was made out of the truma that was separated to him. Avaloi b'tero. However, it is absolutely prohibited to make matzah out of produce that was not tithed. A Levi is not allowed to make matzah out of the tithe that was given to him if he has not yet given his portion that he has to give to the kohen. And similarly, you're not allowed to make matzah from either the second tithe or from anything that was sanctified if you did not redeem it properly. The Mishnah continues, Chales toida urkike nazir. So during the times of the Beis Hamikdash, there were certain sacrifices that were obligatory to bring with unleavened bread. For example, a Thanksgiving offering, you had to bring unleavened bread. Another word for that is matzah. Or a nazir, a person who made a Nazirite vow, would have to bring various unleavened wafers with his offering. So the question is, can you use this type of matzah, which a person made in anticipation of having to bring either a Nazirite sacrifice or a Thanksgiving sacrifice? Can you use that for matzah? So the Mishnah says, "Asan la'atzmoi ein yotze behen," that if a person made these wafers or the unleavened bread for themselves, then they're not able to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah for it. Because there's a rule when it comes to making matzah, matzah has to be made specifically for the purpose of the mitzvah of matzah. In a matzah bakery, when people are rolling out the dough and they're kneading the dough, they say l'shem matzah mitzvah. This matzah is being made for the sake of using at the Seder. So therefore, matzah or wafers that were made for the purposes of bringing an offering would be disqualified for making for eating matzah on Pesach. However, if this unleavened bread, matzah, or these wafers, which would qualify as matzah, you did not make them for yourself. Rather, you made them to sell to any other people who might need to bring this type of offering. Yotze behen, you are allowed to use that for the mitzvah of matzah. The reason for that is because when you're selling matzah, everyone knows that you don't always sell everything that you make. So therefore, the mindset of a person who's selling this unleavened bread and who's selling these wafers thinks that if I sell them all, fantastic. But if I don't sell them all, then I'm going to use them for myself to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah on Pesach. So therefore, a person who baked them for the purpose of selling would have had in mind that they can be used for the mitzvah of matzah as well. All right, the Mishnah continues, Mishnah number Vav. We are obligated to eat morar, bitter herbs on Pesach. So now we're going to have a list of what are the bitter herbs that a person is allowed to, that a person can fulfill the mitzvah of, the mitzvah of eating bitter herbs on Pesach. The Mishnah says, B'chazeres, you're allowed to use romaine lettuce. Uve ulshin, you're allowed to use endives. Uve samcha, you're allowed to use horseradish. Uve charvivna, and I'm going to read to you what the Art Scroll translates this as. It's called Eryngium criticum, which is apparently some type of shrub that grows in the land of Israel that has green leaves that are bitter tasting that you could use for morar. Uve morar, and any other bitter herbs. So even though the Mishnah does say that any bitter herbs technically would be able to be used to fulfill the mitzvah of eating morar on Pesach, however, the preferred method is, of course, horseradish and romaine lettuce. Those are the primary, although endives are able to be used and any other bitter herb could be used as well. Now, all of these types of greens that you could use to fulfill the mitzvah of maror, the Mishnah says, yoitzin behen bein lachin bein yaveshin. You will fulfill your obligation of eating the maror, whether they was fresh or whether they were dried. Of a loy kivushin, however, you would not be able to use them if they were pickled. V'loy shalukin, you would not be able to use it if they were heavily boiled and turned into some type of mush. V'loy muvushalin, you would not be able to use them even if they were only lightly boiled. You wouldn't be able to use them as well because that totally weakens and takes away the sharpness of the flavor. Umitzdarvin the kazayas, and technically speaking, you could use all of the species, little parts of each of them, provided that they join together to at least be the volume of an olive. If it's not the volume of an olive, you're not going to fulfill your obligation, which is approximately 1 ounce. And you could fulfill your obligation by eating the stalk. You don't necessarily have to eat the leaf itself, but the stalk will work as well. Ubedamai, however, produce that the truma or the meiser was not separated from them. Ubedamai, however, if you're not sure if the meiser was separated, ubemeiser rishon shenat lo trumasai, or if if it was demai, you'd be allowed to eat it as well. Just as we said before about the matzah, you'd be able to fulfill the mitzvah if you're doubtful if the tithe was separated. So too, any of these types of lettuces and bitter herbs, if you're doubtful if the tithe was separated, you could still fulfill the mitzvah. Uba ma'aser rishon shenitlu trumasai, the same thing would apply to a Levi who received his tithe and separated the truma from his tithe to the Kohen. You would be allowed to use that for maror, even though the original owner did not separate the truma, provided that he didn't separate the truma because he was not yet obligated to do so. Uber meiser sheni v'hegdish shenivdu, and similarly, you could use produce that was meiser sheni, that was the second tithe, or that was dedicated to the temple, that was redeemed, even though it was not redeemed with the additional fifth, you still could fulfill the mitzvah. Right. The next Mishnah, Mishnah number 7, Mishnah number Zayin, Zog Delika Mishnah, Ein Sheirin Es Hamursin L'Tarnagolim. You cannot soak bran in water, even though you're just going to use it to feed chickens. Why? Because it can turn into chametz. Abel Cholton. However, you are allowed to pour boiling hot water onto the bran, which will scald it quickly, and then roll off the bran, because that is not going to turn into chametz. Now, even though technically this is allowed, right? Historically, the tradition is not to do this. We don't want to mess with putting water on chametz on bran during Pesach due to the potential of it becoming chametz. Ha'isha le'sisra es hamurshin shetoilin biyada lemerchatz. A woman is not allowed to bring bran to the bathhouse, because even though you want to make some type of cream with the bran, making that cream with the bran is ultimately going to turn to chametz, so you're not allowed to do it. Aval shafa hi bebisra yavish. However, a person is allowed to rub dry bran on your skin, even if your skin is sweaty, because the halacha is that sweat cannot make something turn into chametz. It is forbidden for a person to chew wheat and then put that wheat on your wound. This is as like some type of ancient remedy or something like that. You're not allowed to do that. Why? Because chewing of grain wheat is going to make it turn into barley. The halacha is that your saliva does contribute to grain flour turning into chametz. The next Mishnah, Mishnah number 8, Zog Delika Mishnah, Ein Noisnes HaKemach L'Soich HaChareses, Oy L'Soich HaChardo. On Pesach, you are prohibited from putting flour into charosas. Now, when we say charosas, we don't mean the charosas that we use at the Seder, but there was a similar type of very bitter mixture that of the various vegetables and spices that was made throughout the year as a dip, and you put flour into it to lessen the intensity of the dip, you're not allowed to do that on Pesach. Why? Because it could become chametz, right? There's water that's in that dip. Similarly, you're not allowed to put any flour into really sharp mustard to lessen the heat of the mustard, because in this mustard mixture there's water in it and it could become a chametz. Now we know for Ashkenazi Jews, we're not allowed to have mustard on Pesach anyway. The Mishnah continues, now what if you did put flour into this mixture of charosas or the mixture of mustard? Yoichel miyad. What should you do? Eat it right away. Why? Because of the various ingredients that are included in the charosas and the mustard, it will take extra time for the flour to actually turn into chametz. Therefore, if you eat it right away, it's not going to turn into chametz, and you would be okay. Rabbi Meir says no. Right? We're not messing with eating flour that is mixed with water, even though it's charosas, even though it's with mustard, and it's going to take longer. It's dangerous, and don't do it. Now, it happens to be that the halacha is that you're allowed to do it, but the tradition is absolutely not to do it, that if you did it accidentally, do not eat that because it could still turn into chametz. The Mishnah continues, Ein mevashlen es Pesach v'lei b'mashkin v'lei b'mei peres. The Torah tells us that you're not allowed to cook the Pesach offering in water, right? It has to be roasted. So the Mishnah tells us this doesn't only mean water, it means any other liquid, any other fruit juices. It's prohibited to cook the Pesach sacrifice in. However, while it's roasting, you are allowed to baste it, right? You would be allowed to put some type of barbecue sauce or something like that on it. And you're allowed to dip it into sauces and things like that while you're eating it. You're just not allowed to cook it in any other type of liquid. Now, what about water that a baker uses to wash his hands and cool his hands down when baking bread? The halacha is you absolutely have to spill that water on the ground. You cannot keep that during Pesach because the water and the flour, the dough that's on the baker's hand is going to turn into chametz. As it says, because that is going to turn into chametz. Right? That concludes chapter number 2 of the Mishnayos of the Tractate of Pesachim. I hope that you enjoyed it and learned some history, some background, as well as some practical halachas. If you have any questions, please let me know. I look forward to joining you next time. Have a good day.